we would like to focus in this webinar and to pay special attention on the refugees and migrants who often face barriers, especially in access to quality education and social inclusion due to their cultural, linguistic, religious identity and other systematic challenges. These barriers that refugees and migrants are facing across Europe are also leading to reinforce their feeling of social exclusion and also discrimination and isolation in many communities. When educational systems integrate narratives of inclusivity, and especially when we speak about interreligious dialogue and religious literacy, they also empower young learners to navigate in their new host societies, but also the host culture to understand various identities of migrants and refugees in present-day Europe. Without raising awareness on the risks and the challenges, we are not addressing some of the most pressing issues our societies are facing today, and we are also contributing and not deconstructing a number of stereotypes that are fostering divisions and raising discriminations in many societal levels. This webinar is also part of a larger endeavor of the CoreNet, a European cost action project that is focusing on religion and migration specifically, and its aim to contribute also from academic perspective and research perspective to provide recommendations also for policymakers. Without this holistic approach, policies that are developed are lacking different perspectives that are in such complex situations that we are currently facing in our societies, inevitably leading to one-sided perspective of a much more complex problem. And this is why today we have gathered speakers who are coming from different institutions, having different experiences, and also having different solutions, hopefully, or recommendations, how some of the challenges could be addressed, what would be directions that they identify as a kind of way forward.
Having served the educational system for 24 years, first as a teacher in an intercultural school with migrants and students, and then at the Ministry of Education before moving to Ministry of Migration, I can say without a doubt that the education system cannot and should not do it alone. This is not a matter integration, as well as if we want to dispel prejudices, ignorance, stereotypes, it's a matter of a broader society. And we need to highlight, maybe this is what I would like to focus on the interplay between various societal systems. It's not just the educational system, it's the social welfare system, it's the legal frameworks, not just education. And what do I mean by this? I agree with discrimination, and I can see that at least in Greece, there is also structural discrimination. So this is something that education system alone cannot fight against. We cannot operate in isolation. For me, we need to engage the whole society. We need to bring local communities if we want to really transform the reality of migrant and refugee children. Some of you wrote about language, that language is a major factor. I heard recently from an expert on teaching Greek as a second language that language is not an object to be taught at schools, because the Greek students do not learn Greek at school. When they go to school, they already speak the language. Language is an element of relationships. We learn to speak the language through relationships with the local population. We speak the language and we learn the language when we speak to peers, when we make friends, when the janitor and the bakery speaks and talks to us. Language is an element of relation. So we're all involved in this. The same about cultural diversity and religious diversity. It is developed through relationships. This is the only way to fight ignorance that you wrote. Unless there is an openness to different cultural traditions, we cannot just rely on educational systems to provide quality education. It's society that needs to be sensitized in the cultural and religious diversity. And don't forget that educators are citizens in a specific society. They are parents in a specific society. So it's a matter of the whole society to integrate people and to provide quality services, because there are so many socioeconomic barriers that if migrant and refugees do not have proper housing, or do not have transportation to go to school, or do not have meals to feed their children, no matter how good the education provided is, the result won't be the one that is actually needed. So we need the whole society on board, and I will end up by bringing on board the media, because a lot of the ignorance, a lot of the misinformation that we have for migration comes from the media fed.
I thought I would concentrate on what I have seen on the ground when in my previous role, and also some other, and I will complement it with other observations. During my time as special representative, you know, it was 2022. It was February 2022. I started in January, so I was. I mean, with my team, had to deal with all the people coming from, the refugees coming from Ukraine. Millions of people had to flee their homes suddenly, and I traveled a lot at that time, and for the 2 years that I spent in that role, so I visited the neighboring countries to Ukraine, countries which were not that much used to have migrants and refugees. Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, Moldova, Romania, all these countries. And what I have seen, I mean, of course, the Ukrainians had a kind of privileged position because the European Union immediately put in action the temporary protection directive, and they didn't have the problems that other refugees have of having their papers in order. So they were residing lawfully, so they could go. They had the right. They had the access to education, but nevertheless, the problems that I saw at that moment I mean, the language barrier was a problem. The language barrier, the limited school capacity, because especially in countries like Slovakia, where there was not even enough spaces for the people of the country, of the host country, suddenly they had to provide spaces for people coming from Ukraine. So this was a big challenge, the limited school capacity, and the difficult tracking of out-of-school children was also a challenge. that I have observed, because the Ukrainian children were following their online education from Ukraine. And a recent report by the Council of Europe in November shows that 50% of the children who left Ukraine because of the war are still to be enrolled in their host country schools. So it's an important number, and 60% of the children who are enrolled take online classes broadcast from Ukraine, in parallel with classes in regular schools. So this gives you an idea of the situation. And what I have also noticed, not only for these children, but also children from Syria, from Afghanistan, and from other places, they suffer from trauma, a big trauma, and they are in psychological distress, and they also have a feeling of instability, and that's why we, the Council of Europe, we also provided some capacity building activities for the professionals of the region, social workers, teachers, psychologists, so that they are reinforced in their capacities, in their skills of dealing with those children with those trauma. Because that's another problem. There was not enough teachers or psychologists or social workers who knew about this issue and who could really help these children. An important aspect also was that the Ukrainians wanted to protect their cultural identity. And that's why the authorities of Ukraine wanted the children to be connected, to continue to be connected with Ukrainian culture and language. And that's why there was this online education, and it was so popular because they didn't want to lose their link with their country. My last visit was to Bulgaria, and there I could visit some reception centers, and there I met a lot of young Syrians, Afghans, and also people from Iraq, young adolescents who were between 15 and 18, and whom you couldn't say whether they were more than 18 or less than 18. And this is also another challenge I wanted to talk to you about, is the situation of those adolescents, unaccompanied children. Geli will know also that this group of people, because Bulgaria is a transit country, in those reception centers, there was no compulsory access to education. It was not compulsory. So you can imagine the situation of young adolescents having to wait in a reception center for their claim to be examined and accepted or rejected. So this is a big challenge. The adolescents and also those who are between 17, 18, because you know that 18 you lose the protection to the national system, and then you are without any protection. So this is a challenge. Geli was talking about lack of transportation. I could see that because, I mean, the reception centers are far away from the cities. They are far away from where these children can go to school. So, and there was no bus and there was no transportation. So if you don't have any bus to go to school, even if you can go to school, I mean, it's difficult for you to go to school. And again, insufficient guidance and training for teachers and education practitioners is something that I have witnessed, because teachers do not know how to deal with people from different backgrounds, from different culture, from different religion. So they are completely, they need guidance. They need support. This was also a challenge, and this is important. Well, of course, stereotypes, you talked about stereotypes, and judgment is also another challenge that I have witnessed. It's based on perceptions, and the problem is that teachers are not equipped to deal with this multiculturalism, with this issue. Of course, the intercultural, religious dialogue, I'm sure can help to address these challenges. I just want to give an example taken also from the Council of Europe. It's a program which is called Intercultural Cities Program that you might have heard about, and it supports cities and regions which include different nationalities from different origins and different languages and different religious beliefs, and support them in their policies through an intercultural lens. I was looking at what they are doing on the website, and I might share the link to this Intercultural Cities program. One of the impacts in the cities that have decided to join this program is that teachers and school administrators became more culturally sensitive, which is, I mean, it's important, and that communication and reciprocal learning improved among children from different backgrounds. So this is a program that I would like to put emphasis on, because it helps cities and regions to have more intercultural policies.
There's educational systems may change narratives to the better is something we should really take in account. And I think it might be part of the solution, because we know that one of the big problems is victimization, that people who feel they are not in, well, they are facing stereotypes, they are framed as the underachievers, as to pupils. If they feel I may be an active part in society, I participate in society, this is really part of the solution. So thank you for the question. Nevertheless, we all know that the narratives surrounding the schools are rather bleak. And to start with a very practical example, today is Migrants' Day. And again, thank you for organizing this, because in Austria, I flipped through the news. No reference to it at all. But quite in the contrary, when I opened the newspaper today in the morning, I was confronted with a new program of a new coalition in part of Austria, in the beautiful country of Steiermark, where they decided to ban any other language, even to be spoken in the breaks, save than German. So children with other mother languages than German are practically forbidden to use their language during school time. And thanks to Geli, thanks to Leila, you have already hit on the problem of media, of politics. And I very much feel that in a time where we face in Europe more and more populism, more and more right-wing, narratives, framing, schools all the more mirror the general atmosphere in society, and this is a big challenge for teachers, for pupils. So the question on curricula. We have, and I actually looked it up again, in our Austrian constitution, on constitutional level, a very beautiful article giving what should be the overall goal of education. And it reads like this. Let me please quote, because it's really beautiful. Every young person should be led to independent judgment and social understanding in accordance with his or her development and educational path, be open to the political, religious, and ideological thinking of others, and be enabled to participate in the cultural and economic life of Austria, Europe, and the world, and to contribute to the common task of humanity with a love of freedom and peace. It's really beautiful. But I think we have to be very careful not to say, because this is so beautiful, everybody acts in line to reach this goal. And I actually did something when I still was a teacher, confronting pupils with this beautiful quotation at the end of their school time, shortly before their final exams. And their reaction was striking. They said, it's ever so beautiful, but it's not what we experienced at school. At least, not always, but good to know. So I think sometimes these beautiful paragraphs should be part of the educational system by ways of making children be aware of their rights and these goals. We have another very clever and good thing in Austria, and this is quite new, and it hits more on the topic of curricula, because the curricula were revised, and we have now as an overall goal intercultural education. And I think this is the right approach. Nevertheless, I very much agree with Leila, who says teachers need constant training and they should be prepared to reach out to reach this goal of intercultural education at schools. We could go in this much further, but I don't want to take too much time because we want to have a kind of dialogue. Just another thought in curricula, and we have been speaking about language. We have, of course, certain languages that might be taught as a second, third, even fourth language. We usually have English, first foreign language, and then either French, Spain, Italian, sometimes Greek, Latin, of course. We don't have Turkish, we don't have Arabic, we don't have Bosnian language. We have it only by way for those children who have it as their mother tongue to strengthen them in their language skills, which is good. But I feel that there is something like a hierarchy of languages. Mm-hmm. And if somebody has Turkish as first language, this is not seen as something to be cherished. And I see a big problem in this. And I so much would like to see the courage of politicians to include in the curricula more languages, to give more options. For when we see the exchange we have in Europe with the world, we need children with more language options, and not only those who have it as their mother tongue. Big topic. And next thing, we say school books are the hidden curricula. And of course, we should have a look how the school books reflect diversity in society. I think there is some kind of improvement in this field. During the last years, there are more and more people who engage in revising these school books. And for example, with small things like taking care what kind of names there are, not only to have the typical Austrian names in the books, to give some kind of belonging to those who have a more foreign sounding second name. Nevertheless, there is much more to be done. Much more. I think we have a very still Eurocentristic view. Best we speak of Christian Jewish heritage. The Islamic heritage is never mentioned. And well, I dream of books where when the topic of math arises, we read about algorithm and how the algorithm has some background in the Orient or in chemistry and biology. All these things are put in a light as if they were invented in Europe. And well, these are some short suggestions. I feel there is a lot to be done, and I'm glad there are people who are willing to rethink things, but I hope for a general discourse in society where the framing of children with migrant background as underachievers or problematic, and they just, well, are a danger to other children, that they are disturbed in their schooling, might change.
Major outcomes of our research project, which has to do with Muslim refugees. In Germany, we did several steps, a qualitative study, a quantitative study. And in both studies, it turned out that the religious faith of the refugees proved significant for their coping with life, and thus also, of course, for their integration into German society. So that was important for us to shed also this positive light on religiosity, because it's mainly seen as a negative thing by most of the German population. I will come back to that later. In the qualitative study, many of the young refugees, both Muslim and Christian, said, my faith has helped me to endure, for instance, the hardships of my flight, or to deal with the new situation here in Germany, and also to deal with what has been mentioned, the traumatic memories, the traumatic experiences that we had in our home countries. So as one example, I would like to quote Asif, a 20-year-old Muslim from Syria. He told us, when I was on the Mediterranean, I always used to pray that I will not fall into the water, or that nothing will get broken, so that we will all die or so. Therefore, it was so important that all people simply prayed, that we simply retain peace and calmness and arrive in Greece and get to Germany. I think this is an example how tragic and how dramatic the situations that many refugees experienced. And they experienced that their religious faith was helpful in this situation. And sometimes they also experienced that people from different religions prayed together. And that, of course, also did something with them. So in the quantitative study, we found significant correlations between the refugees' religiosity and, for instance, their feeling of purpose in life. So as a consequence, it seems to me that it is very advisable to take the religious needs of the refugees, their religiosity, seriously if we want to support their inclusion in German society. Secondly, though, for some refugees, it is not so easy to understand that in a European country like Germany, there are not only diverse religions, but also a lot of people who are not religious, who don't believe in God at all. And still, they may be morally good people. Our interviews were conducted before the start of the Ukraine war, so most refugees came from Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan. And in these countries, people without any religion are widely unknown. But of course, it is very important that these refugees get in contact with non-believers and make positive experiences with non-believers. So again, I want to take an example from our research and quote Tamina, a 14-year-old girl from Afghanistan, who told us, "I have here also seen people who do not believe in God, but they have a good life and they are good to other people because they have a good heart." And I remember very vividly a young man from Iraq who told us that one of his caregivers at the initial asylum reception center did not believe in God, but as a farewell present, this caregiver gave him a prayer rug. And that impressed him very much. Somebody who does not believe in God presents me with a prayer rug so that I can practice my religion better. Thirdly, and sadly, and that has already been mentioned, especially with Muslim refugees, their religion can also be a reason for discrimination. In Germany, as you probably know, the Muslim faith is often perceived as strange and as fear-generating core characteristic of refugees. There is a fear of Islamization, and Muslims are sometimes generally suspected to be dangerous extremists. This, of course, can significantly hamper integration and inclusion. But as also has been mentioned already, where do the prejudices and fears mainly come from? They come mainly from the media. In and through the media, people hear or see about Islamistic terror and may encounter extremistic, Salafistic preachers on TikTok, but they may also encounter intolerant right-wing extremistic views. So we should be aware, I think, that as in almost all spheres of life today, our encounters with other religions are hybrid encounters. They are always a mixture of personal encounters and encounters in the media. And as a consequence, I think critical media education, critical digital education should be necessarily be included in religious education and especially in interreligious learning.
Austria is quite exceptionally, when compared to other European countries, in enabling all religious faiths that are officially acknowledged by state to offer religious education at public schools. So we have Islam lessons for around 100,000 children, and we have more than 650 teachers, Islam teachers, who are in the regular school system colleagues not only efficient in the classroom, but as part of the schools. And we feel that this opens a way for something like an institutionalized dialogue. Teachers of Islamic religion often are somehow bridges in the school system when it comes to questions in cultural, intercultural, religious ways. And of course, we try to give them special training to be fit for these challenges as well, because it's not easy. Sometimes they are confronted with questions that reflect what Manfred has spoken about, somehow difficult atmosphere for Muslims. Fear that, well, what is this about? Is a young child who wants to fast in Ramadan perhaps attracted to extremist views? How do I take this? So we do have a very good opportunity, on the one hand, to tackle these issues by way of dialogue, by offering support. But all the more, as we are part in the school system, we are very open to cooperations. And I could give you many examples for excellence projects, not only in the interreligious field, where the Catholic teacher, the Protestant teacher, Orthodox, Alevi, and Islam teacher do something together. The Buddhists, we have many faiths who come together. And I think this is something the children really cherish and where they learn in a practical way. Every time when holidays are coming up, people look for excursions. For example, we have excursions to churches, mosques. Actually, today, just after our webinar, I'm off to such a beautiful excursion. And I think this is another excellent way to encounter daily life of children as to their religious background, to get away from the narratives media set to a more practical thing. What is really going on? To give you an example, in one of these mosque encounters, a girl said, "Oh, I actually know something about Islam, which I very much like. I know that you had the first toothbrush." And it was a small detail, but I suppose a Muslim friend of her showed her miswak, this very traditional old thing, and she was impressed by it. We wouldn't think perhaps about integrating this in our teaching material, but sometimes the best ideas come from the children themselves and by their rejection as well. So I feel I can't give you more details, but there is really an excellent basis. And last thing to add, at the moment, of course, we are very much taking into account the situation in the Middle East. And many Muslim children feel they are viewed. How do they see this? What position do they take? And I feel it's very important that Muslim-Jewish dialogue is working as well. And I'm glad that my Jewish colleague, Rabbi Shlomo Hofmeister, is somebody where we can really rely on. And as we talk about narratives, sometimes it's not about talking, but setting an example. When we had a meeting at the school authority, we arranged we enter the room together.
listening to Leila and Carla and Manfred, I kept noting things. I have a couple of things that came to my mind, and one of them actually was in our Q&A, because myself, being a secular person, I'm very spiritual. I am not religious, but I'm very spiritual. So this is why what I always advocate for is interfaith education, not interreligious. And I have been part of my trainings was on intercultural - interfaith education. So I do believe that there are a lot of us, not just refugees, that we are very spiritual without practicing a religion, which is very difficult to advocate for in Greece, because we are a mono-religious, monolingual country with a lot of resistance to other religions. So what Manfred and Carla were saying resonate a lot to my surrounding and to my social milieu. One of the good practices that I saw working was cultural mediators. This is a new profession for Greece. We did not have it. And it is a good practice because we had to invent the occupational profile of the cultural mediator. It took us years. I was part of the process, and it took us maybe 5 or 6 years, mainly because it required, again, the interplay of other ministers that had other priorities, and this specific occupational profile was not among their priorities, because it was referring to a specific group of people. But once it was there, we saw amazing good practices, because they're not interpreters. They're not people that just translate from one language to the other. They're people that help with the cultural sensitivity of entities dealing with refugees. They're people that can be found in hospitals, that can be found in judicial contexts, and they really support the integration, and they really interfere with the cultural sensitivity of the local communities. There are different examples how we have used them and what we have done with them, but one of them, one of the cultural mediators that I have been working very closely with, because we only have about 32 currently that are accredited and they have gone through a specific training, is an amazing religious person coming from Egypt. And he has helped me a lot with unaccompanied minors that are Muslims, and they tend a certain mosque, and we have wonderful discussions after the mosque, and I have seen how well he can work with both communities, the local and our unaccompanied minors. So this is one good practice, a new occupational profile that was born out of the need. And now what we're trying to do is we try to work with terminology and create a training for different contexts. So we have cultural mediators for the health system, for the educational system, for the legal system, and so on and so forth. Another very good example, and I will put the link in the chat so you can download the PDF, is a project called ACE, All Children in Education. It's a very good practice, because the Ministry of Migration worked with the Ministry of Education and UNICEF and got the money from the European Union. So it was really interesting. When you join forces, then you can really have a good practice because, for example, all children in education created what we called homework and creative activities centers, which were situated within the Ministry of Migration Centers for Refugees. So what they did, after kids were in formal education in schools, we had other educations taking care of their homework support. But having the Ministry of Migration along gave access for the establishment of these centers within accommodation centers. But at the same time, having Ministry of Education, we had the different teachers working together, so there was a continuity of education. So there was a teaching for Greek language, for example, or for maths or for science that the teachers in the ACE program were taking from the teachers from school. So they worked together. At the same time, we have centers in the urban context. So it was not just homework centers within the refugee accommodation center, but also in the urban for the refugees that live with their families or for unaccompanied minors that their housing is outside the centers. The second thing that was that did this program, because it had the money, it took over some of the training of the teachers in formal education. So everything that you spoke about, Leila, Carla, and Manfred, was taken care of because there was the money, because many times for the funding is the factor and not the willingness of the teachers or the education system to provide training. It's the money. Where does the money come from? So having the money, they had incredible good trainings of 400 hours, taking care of all these things of intercultural education, interfaith education for teachers in formal schools. The third thing that they did, and I loved it, was the production of material. And again, they took care of all the little details that Carla spoke about. Even the names of the characters were very carefully written. The different religions, the different cultural diversity issues were there. And so we had proper material for teachers to use. And a last thing that you will find, and it is amazing for us, was the accelerated learning material, which was the case. For example, we had kids that they had no prior schooling in maths, and they were placed because of their age in a grade that they couldn't understand anything, even if they did speak the language, because they had no prior knowledge of maths or of science. So with this accelerated learning, there was condensed material that brought them to a certain curriculum base, so they could come into terms with where their Greek peers were. So I think that there are a lot of details that I don't want to bore you with. So how trainings were trauma informed. So again, it touched upon what you've said, that teachers need to be sensitized in the trauma, and not only the original trauma, but the trauma that we continue inflicting in children. And another good thing was paper, books, because we talk about all these digital education, and Leila was so right when she said exactly what the situation was in Greece also, that Ukrainian refugees had the computers to go and do online education with Ukraine. But we are talking about the rest of the refugees that did not have a tablet, that did not have a computer. So we saw that there was the need to both find fundings for electronic devices, but also take care of books that students could use. I know it's not the most environmentally political thing to do, but getting to these refugees was the priority.
Well, let me start again with an example from our research. There was this 14-year-old Muslim girl from Syria, and she told us this story. Well, at first, I was the only one at school who had a headscarf. At the beginning of the school year, everything was very strange. They were all looking at me. Then I talked to the teacher. I gave a presentation. It was a bit about Syria and about my religion. Then they understood that. And I find that quite remarkable that this girl herself took the initiative and approached her teacher with the suggestion to inform the others about Syria and her Islamic faith, and it worked. Then they understood that. So that conforms with the research evidence that we have from other projects that clearly shows that interreligious learning can reduce prejudices and foster a positive attitude towards the other. And what is most effective in this connection, and that has already been mentioned, is the personal contact with people from other religions. My predecessor, Johannes Lennemann, already commented in the chat before that this kind of learning in encounter, in German, Begegnungslernen, learning in encounter, is so important. You need to really encounter people. But of course, as I said before, this encounter, every encounter has also this dimension of being tied to the digital experiences, to the media experiences we have. We should not leave that out of account. So I think this encounter, learning in encounter, is a very important concept for religious education. But I feel that the potential of religious education to promote inclusion goes even further. Religious education can stimulate students to discover that they can learn something from another religion or worldview for themselves. So British religious educators talk about learning from religion and not just about religion. So for instance, hearing about how important regular prayers are for many Muslims may be a stimulus for Christian students to think about their own prayer practice and so on. And also it is helpful, and that I think is an important point, especially in our European societies, it is helpful for secular as well as religious students to get a clearer idea of the relationship between secular values and religious values. So the famous German philosopher Jürgen Habermas has spoken of necessary complementary learning processes. Complementary learning processes between secular and religious people. Especially migrants coming into a European country like Germany should learn that its primary political values and principles are not religious but secular ones, such as, for instance, human dignity and human rights, for instance. And all students, diversely secular as well as diversely religious, can discover that these secular values are compatible and can be linked with religious values from diverse religions. So, for instance, the fundamental human rights value of human dignity can be linked with the Christian biblical belief that humans are created in God's image, or with the Islamic Quranic belief that humans are Allah's representatives, Khalifa on earth, including a special responsibility, of course. So, of course, there will also be challenges of human rights for certain religious beliefs and practices. that have to be critically addressed. But it is important, I think, as a basis for such critical discussion, that it becomes clear where the links may be between religious values and secular values. US-American philosopher John Rawls has spoken of an overlapping consensus in this context. This would be a major aim of a good religious education, to make clear that such an overlapping consensus is possible and that we work towards such an overlapping consensus. And so as a consequence for myself and for my own concept also of interreligious education, human rights education and citizenship education are so important and have to be intertwined with religious education.
Based on my experience, on what I have seen and what can be done, the training of teachers in multiculturalism, in interculture, and giving them some intercultural competences is really important. It's easier said than done, I would say, because, there are many European countries and they all have different practices, but this is something which is really, really important in my view. Not only teachers, but also childcare workers, preschool teachers. All this group of people should acquire this multicultural and intercultural competences. And this is something important. And I also think that education should be compulsory, even in reception centers. I know that it's difficult. Again, it's easier said than done, because there are resource problem, financial problems, etc. And in some countries of transit, authorities do not want to invest maybe too much in this. But it's key, because if you have young people waiting in reception centers for too long without any access to education, this creates a problem for our society. So compulsory education, the number two, and Carla Amina mentioned it. We should not forget the native language. And bilingual, I call it bilingual, but education in your native language should also be provided. These are the three main policy recommendations that I would make in this field.
The last thing that I would like to say is advocate, advocate, advocate. Wherever you are, with your friends, with your families, with your co-workers, we need to advocate what is really happening in order for people to be more critical about what they read. This is what I wanted to say.
I can end by just adding one point we have discussed, or I have advanced suggestion that critical media education is very important, but we should also take, of course, account of the positive potential of digital media. That's what we are now doing with this webinar. And there are interesting projects on that. I shared with you one link that a colleague of mine is working in such an Erasmus Plus project that is called Sharing Worldviews. And it's very much about promoting exchange and also digital exchange between countries, between cultures, between religions. And there is also a special program, Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange. So I think we should not be too one-sided, only looking critically at the media, but also looking at the potentials when it comes to interreligious dialogue and interreligious learning.
I want to return to the question. It's about building, shaping narratives. And I feel there is a kind of reluctancy among many peoples in the educational field because they are tired. There are so many challenges, and this is one challenge more. And so I really think a lot about how can we encourage them and how can we make this advocating that Geli calls for, and I support. Yes, advocate, advocate, advocate. But how can we hit something that the willingness to join us gets higher? And I came up with an idea. It's not good to have totally new ideas in the end, I know, but I try. We have a rich history of migration within Europe. We have traumatizing experiences in generations not so far. And I think this might be something that could help to tackle this issue about identities, because this is on the core of it. People feel if we engage in all this, what we are talking about, what will this have as an effect on my own identity?
I've learned a lot, and Carla, Amina, what you're talking about, identity, it's really a subject which I would really like to work on, because it's the core, I think. We talk also about multiple identities. Well, it will be a bit legal, maybe. It will be, but still, we have to recall the obligations that our governments are also taking. No, I mean, the UN Convention on the Rights of Children, for instance, they have an Article 8 which says the rights of children, the children have the right to preserve their identity. So there is a right for the children and for migrant and refugee children to preserve their identity. It's enshrined in a United Nations Convention. It's sometimes good to remind ourselves of these obligations.